everyone was so accepting of the Catholic Church, of like the accusations and how widespread that abuse was. Another thing that became a punchline, which is always weird to me. Like, I think it's we can joke about anything, but once the society just understands the punchline, they forget about how grisly a lot of the stuff behind it is, like everything we've been talking about. But if our society can accept that the Catholic Church had so much abuse going on, why has it been so hard for everyone to accept that it's going on in Hollywood? Maybe it's because people look up to it more, or they have, these idols, I'm putting in quotes, that are in Hollywood. But it's clearly, what was the young girl's name from Wizard of Oz? Judy Garland, right?
Yes, yes.
Like, she had a horrible experience?
So many of those early stars, if you read, I mean, Marilyn Monroe, if you read their biographies and you read about the things that men in that time were allowed to get away with, that make, Harvey Weinstein stories pale in comparison, actually. So there's always been this dark, seamy side to the entertainment industry. And so I think that really in the early 90s, I think people were not prepared to take the abuse of males seriously, sexual abuse. And also these were strong, healthy looking men when they were arrested. When they killed their parents, they were technically legally grown men.
Right.
And so people see these really, strong, healthy looking, good looking, virile appearing men, and they say, how could one of these guys be bending over for his dad to rape him, regularly? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Or people would say, you don't have to kill your parents. You just leave. You just run away. Right. And to that, I would say that when someone has been abused on the level that these guys were abused, and when they've grown up in talk about an inverted world, such a crazy, crazy environment, then their thinking is going to get crazy. So I don't know what was in the head of the Menendez brothers when they killed their parents. What I would imagine is it was a mix of a lot of things. It was a mix of genuine fear. It was a mix of anger. It was a mix of, and then also personal self-interest. And I'm sure, and I do think that to an extent, the financial interest came into it, in that they could not imagine a life apart from the safety, the cocoon of safety, financial safety, security, I should say, that their parents had given them, their parents had instilled in them that nothing else mattered as much as success and financial security. So I'm just not sure that these guys were capable, in the state that they were in, and after the abuse that they'd suffered, of just as very young adults just walking away. Right.
I also think they're so far removed from reality, because on one sense, no offense to some friends of mine in Beverly Hills, but you are detached from reality when you're in that world. It's not this world. And then to add on top of that, the horrible suffering of abuse that they went through, that they're saying went through since childhood. Because they say it started young, right? It wasn't like...
Right, 6 years old.
Right. So that right there just shatters anyone's sense of reality. And I think it's very hard to even try to imagine logic as we might think of it, and what they're dealing with in that world within the cocoon of Beverly Hills. Right. So it's really crazy.
Absolutely it is. And, there is so much that we don't even have time to discuss in terms of the abuse that they went through, even outside of the horrendous sexual stuff. I mean, one of Jose Menendez's relatives, someone who should have been inclined to defend him, testified that he saw Jose punch one of his children in the face when they were 5 years old with a closed fist, just punch him in the face. Now, this is one of Jose's relatives. Wow. There were people, and he killed a couple of their beloved pets. He killed a dog. He beat a bunny rabbit to death that Lyle brought home. Lyle brought home this bunny that he had gotten from school, I don't know, class or something. And he was in love with his bunny. And his mom said, get rid of it. Dad said, get rid of it. He took a little too long to get rid of it. So one of the parents, I think Jose, beat the thing to death, and Lyle found it beaten to death in the trash. So we're talking again about an incredibly sadistic man and an incredibly troubled woman attached to him who had a whole range of issues of her own. And then together they just became this monster. They are the monster. Yeah. And these kids grew up in an incredibly insane, traumatizing environment.
It's hard for people to realize that these monsters are everywhere. I mean, from all the reading we've done on this show, we talked about, and things I've written about, there are monsters that are just working at the gas station. There's monsters in every level, everywhere. They're hiding. They're obviously in positions of power. They're in schools, and you have to be aware of that. But when you're talking about this type of the Jose Menendez character, it almost reminds me of a Ted Bundy. Even though he wasn't really a serial killer, Ted Bundy had power. He was hiding in plain sight, had a wife, you know, and was satisfying these evil urges in the shadows for a long time. And I think, you know, the thing we hear so much when these types of stories break, especially when it comes to like serial killers or serial rapists and these just evil degenerates. Oh, he was such a nice neighbor. I'm so shocked. I'm so shocked.
Well,
But
it's
right
funny,
there.
and yes, you're right about that. What's funny though in the Menendez case is that they couldn't even find someone to say he's a nice neighbor.
Right.
Seriously, like,
Jeez.
I mean, it's funny in some of the documentaries I've seen, there are guys who worked with him, fellow executives, and they said that when they found out he had been shot, they weren't surprised. They said he was one of the top 5 meanest people, most horrible people they'd ever met. I mean, just everyone.
Wow.
And there were relatives also of the Menendez brothers, cousins, who lived with the family at various times, and they testified to horrible things. One of them said that one night Lyle Menendez, when he was a child, he came into her room and asked if he could sleep with her because his dad was coming into his room and touching his genitals.
Jeez.
Well, she's obviously very alarmed. She was a teenager at that time.
Right.
So she goes and she gets Kitty, the wife and the mother, and tells her about this. And Kitty's response, without a word, is to take the kid back upstairs, shut the door, never mention it again. There were other instances where a cousin who lived with them testified that Jose Menendez, would take his kids into his room, close the door, and they would hear weird sounds and screaming. And they would go to try to, investigate, help. And Kitty would scream, "Don't go down there! Don't go down there!" because she knew what was going on.
Right.
So this is an incredibly sick structure where the mother is not only looking the other way, but seems to be facilitating in some way or abetting this.
Was there evidence that she was being abused by him?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, she was in hell, and she was heavily self-medicating, and she was an alcoholic. So, I have no problem believing that to a certain extent, her failures were results of the abuse that she was enduring. But she also had her own issues, and she would go into rages, which clench her fist. She would lock her kids in the closet for sometimes days at a time. They would have to defecate in the closet.
Oh man!
I mean, we're just talking like crazy people.
Wow, wow. Is there anything known about Jose's history? Like, was he a victim of abuse at some point or anything like that we know of?
So it's interesting that the Ryan Murphy series does speculate about that, or it includes a plot line where Jose confronts his own mother about her molesting him. And I don't know that that is actually based on any kind of testimony or anything, because I have not yet found that outside of that show. So I don't know if that's speculative or not. But, I just believe that most people who are victimizers are playing out their own victimization. And so I would not be surprised to find that he had been molested or abused. But then again, who knows? Some people, I think, just have a screw loose in the head, or have their sexual wiring is just off, or they don't have an empathy capacity, right?
Yeah.